Hey everyone, Zach here. Today I'm going to talk through per host tabular reports with my new role that I've published in the zjleblanc.reporting collection. So in the past I've done a tabular report, but it was basically collecting information generally within the same table for various hosts. And today what I want to do is allow you to run that same role and generate a single report where you can toggle through different hosts in your inventory and see the same tabular data for that particular host. So the example I'm going to use today is I have a Linux box and a Windows box, and I'm going to gather process information from each of those boxes. Now, one of the things that I added into this particular role is the ability to have two different data sets for the various hosts, actually infinite different data sets for the amount of hosts that you have in your inventory that you're running this report on, because the tables themselves are independent tables, right? Within the view, you'll actually use a select box to pick the host you want to look at, and then the table itself will be rendered. Now, using this, I think it makes sense to always make sure that the data within the various, host tables represents the same thing. But the reason why I want to show the flexibility of different, data models is when we talk about cross-platform reporting and maybe process information for a Linux host looks slightly different than process information for a Windows host. And you certainly could normalize those two things, but if you want a report where you want the headers to make sense to a Windows admin and the headers to make sense to a Linux admin, I think it's totally reasonable to have a single report with all your hosts where the tables represent the same thing, but the actual data model is slightly different. So a couple variables I want to introduce for this role that are different than my just tabular reporting role is table hosts. So these are going to be the hosts that I want to use to iterate over to generate reports. It's going to default to Ansible play hosts, so that's all the hosts that the play is targeting in the playbook that you're running. But you can limit it even further and specify exactly which hosts you want to run against. The table data fact, so this is the name of the fact used to store the tabular data for that particular host. And it's important that this tabular data fact is given a name and then used in all scenarios where you're gathering data. And I'll show kind of what that looks like in my playbook. And then lastly, the table headers fact. That is if you want to specify the headers to be used for that particular host's report. If you don't specify, the role will deduce what those headers should be from the data if it can. So let me give you an idea of what does an actual playbook look like. So in this example, you'll see I'm running against my AWS EC2 instances. And I first have a block here where I'm going to get the Windows process data. So this is basically saying when the host is in the Windows group, run these tasks. And I'm going to run a simple PowerShell script where I get some process information. And then I'm doing the important thing where I set those facts for the reporting. So I'm setting process report data to the result of that PowerShell script, which is a JSON object. And then I'm specifying the process report headers that I want to use. So some CPU information and some memory information. If I scroll down, the next block here is going to be focused on my Linux host. Again, same condition, right? Just checking to see if it's in the Linux group. I then will actually use the PS command to grab process information. And parsing out the data is actually a little bit cleaner in this example where I'm able to use the community general JC plugin to parse the PS output. And again, that will also give me a JSON object. And I'll show you guys what those look like in the output of an actual run. So the final step here is to actually add the report server to my in-memory inventory. This may be specific to my use case. Basically, I have an inventory with just my EC2 hosts, but I have a report server in my lab. So I want to quickly add that to my in-memory inventory and allow me to publish the resulting HTML report to that host itself, and I will show you guys the report live at the end of this. Lastly is me actually calling the role, right? So this is the meat of it. This is what I really want to show in this blog post. I have some options here where I can give the table a title, I can give it a description. Again, in what I'm doing here is I'm saying Ansible play hosts, and I'm actually doing a difference here. So this would be if my report server was in the set of hosts that the play runs against, I may want to do a diff on the list to make sure that I don't actually report on the report server itself, because that's not what I'm trying to do here. I then say my table data fact, which again, you saw me set process report data for both the Linux and the Windows host. So that's why I'm telling the role what fact the data is in. And then similarly for the headers. And again, if that fact is not set for the headers, the role will automatically try to to deduce the headers itself, it will not fail. And then lastly, of course, my remote host that I'm running against, that's my report server and my destination. So you might see this URL in a moment when we go view it live. So again, I just want to really touch on as well, in the references for this blog post, you can actually go to the README for the role itself and kind of dive in there and see what are all the variables available to you and some examples for how to use it. Let me go over here. I actually ran this just a moment ago, but let me rerun it to give you an idea of what it looks like. So basically it's doing the steps I just showed you. So it'll go ahead and connect to my Windows host and my Linux host and generate the report. What I wanted to show was after I set the table data fact, just an idea of what that data looks like. So again, it's a list of dictionaries. So you can kind of think of these dictionary objects as your individual rows, which have process information. And in this case, right, it's system D command. If I keep scrolling down, there's probably some different stuff in here, net and s. So anyways, that's the data being used. And if I went to my set the table, my Windows process, sorry if I keep scrolling up, very similar, right? So not exactly the same data model, but a similar process report data where I've got CPU information, memory information as well. And then lastly, if I come over to the report itself, I can refresh and you'll see it just got generated, and I have my rel instance, and I can filter that. If I come in here and type cronny, I can filter it down, or I can actually switch over to my Windows host, and again you'll see data model slightly changed. The information is the same, so I think that's pretty important as well. We don't want to be mixing up the information within the same report, but I think it's fine to have, in my opinion, it's fine to have different data models as long as it's representing the same information. And these headers may make more sense to a Windows admin who's looking at this than these headers, which may make more sense to a Linux admin. And again, this is just flexibility of the role. You very well could have two separate reports. If you wanted just a Linux process report and a Windows process report, you could still use this role to do that. And you would just generate two different reports and specify the subset of the host that you want to generate the report for, and do one for Linux and one for Windows. So I hope you enjoyed this. Please feel free to drop a comment if you have any ideas on how else this could be used. And I appreciate your feedback. Thanks for listening.